You come to me not merely as seekers of knowledge, but as vessels already trembling beneath the surface of a truth too long suppressed. Some of you call yourselves empaths, those who feel everything. Sometimes too much, sometimes too soon. Often without understanding what it is that moves beneath the skin of another soul. But I ask you, before we proceed, are you sure it is compassion you carry, or is it the disguised shadow of your own unacknowledged wound projected, absorbed, lived through the lives of others so that you never must face the loneliness of your own psyche? Let me be clear. Empathy, in its highest form, is indeed a divine bridge. But there is a darker corridor here. And if you do not discern the difference, it will break you. It already has many times, hasn't it? You confuse emotional identification with understanding. You merge when you should observe. You absorb when you should witness. And each time you do this, your soul leaks little by little until you become a container, not of light, but of other people's unresolved shadows. Now, imagine a dream. In it, a woman kneels before a mirror, but the mirror does not show her face. It shows the face of every person she has loved, saved, or tried to heal. She screams, but no sound comes out, because she has forgotten the shape of her own voice. This dear listener is the archetype of the wounded mirror, the empath whose reflection is devoured by the emotional needs of others. She becomes a sacred prostitute to pain, sacrificing her essence on the altar of another's dysfunction. The unconscious does not tolerate this betrayal without consequence. What you suppress returns not as memory, but as fate. If you do not recognize that your over-identification with others is the avoidance of your own individuation, your own sacred task of wholeness, you will continue to manifest relationships where you are used, misunderstood, and drained. These are not accidents. These are symptoms of spiritual neglect. You see, empathy without boundaries is not a virtue. It is a wound crying for attention. Let us speak now of the psychic economy of the empath. You intuitively feel others because the walls of your psychic house are thin, and yet many of you were never allowed to build those walls. As children, you learned safety came from tuning into the moods of your caregivers. You became hyper-attuned, sensitive not because you were divine, but because it was necessary to survive. Your empathy is not your spiritual gift, it is your trauma response in disguise. And unless you walk back through that developmental labyrinth, you will keep mistaking your pain for purpose. In the myths of old, the oracle could see what others could not, but the oracle was also cursed. The curse was not in the seeing, it was in not being believed, in the weight of knowing without the capacity to act. This, too, is the empath's burden. You see what is broken. You feel what is hidden, but you remain silent. And that silence grows tumors in your spirit, not because you are weak, but because you were never taught that discernment is holier than martyrdom. The unconscious mind, the collective field, feeds on imbalance. Every time you overgive, the psyche compensates with internal depletion, and soon the self splits. One part becomes the savior, always reaching, rescuing absorbing. The other becomes the shadow bitter, exhausted, enraged by the very people you pretend to love. You smile, but you see, you heal, but you hemorrhage. This, too, is not empathy, it is possession. Yes, possession. You have been taken by an archetype, the archetype of the martyr, perhaps, or the sacrificial lamb. And make no mistake, archetypes are not metaphors. They are living psychic energies that exist independently of your ego. And when you fuse with them unconsciously, they live through you. This is not symbolic, it is real. You are not merely acting selflessly, you are being acted upon by a force within the collective unconscious that has claimed your inner throne. You must take it back. To do this, you must walk through the wound, not around it. You must ask, who was I trying to save when I first learned to feel the pain of others more than my own? You must confront the primal moment, often hidden beneath layers of denial and spiritual bypassing, when you decided that your worth was tied to being needed. This moment is not an idea, it is an experience, and it lies in the body, in the dream, in the forgotten memory of a room too quiet, a parent too volatile, a silence too loud to ignore. The dream speaks here again. A man stands before a crowd, bleeding from invisible wounds. They cheer him, they call him a healer. But each time they applaud, another piece of him vanishes. He does not notice until he looks down and realizes he has no feet. He cannot move. He is anchored in his sainthood, paralyzed by the very pedestal they placed him upon. He weeps, and from his tears a mirror grows from the floor, showing him the child. He abandoned the self he left behind. This dream is yours. Let me speak now of boundaries. So many of you fear them because you confuse boundaries with rejection. But a boundary is not a wall, it is a gate. It does not shut the world out, it defines where you begin. Without boundaries, you do not exist. And if you do not exist, then what is it truly that you think you are offering others? You cannot give love if you have no self to give it from. The psyche requires structure. The container of consciousness must be strong enough to hold the alchemical fire of transformation. But the empath, untethered, becomes a sieve, a net, catching everyone else's emotions, while their own disintegrate in the waters of codependency. It is not holy to lose yourself. It is psychological suicide. Now, some of you will resist these words. You will say, but my empathy has saved lives. And perhaps it has. But I ask you again, at what cost? How many times have you bled yourself dry to fill another's cup, only to find your own spirit parched and dying? How often do you wake with dread, not from your own suffering, but from the emotional hangover of carrying pain that was never yours to begin with? You were taught that to feel for others is noble, and yes, it can be, but to carry what is not you is to take the burden of someone else's karma, soul contract, or shadow work is not compassion. It is overreach, and the psyche punishes overreach. The punishment is not divine wrath, it is disintegration. Anxiety, fatigue, depression, chronic illness. These are not purely medical, they are messages. The soul is screaming through the body, begging you to return to yourself. In my practice, I encountered countless empaths who could describe the emotions of every person in their life, yet could not articulate their own desire. They were fluent in the language of other people's needs, yet mute when it came to naming their own. This is not sensitivity, it is a loss of sovereignty. And every soul, to be whole, must reclaim its throne. There is no individuation. Without withdrawal, you must pull back from the projections, the entanglements, the false obligations. You must enter the wilderness of solitude, where the only voice you hear is your own. In that silence, you will meet your true self, not the persona you built to be loved, but the deeper self that holds your archetypal essence. And this diarimpathy is your task, to no longer be the mirror, but the fire, to stop reflecting others and begin illuminating yourself. Only then will your empathy become a tool of wisdom, not a wound of compulsion. Only then will you channel energy rather than consume it. Only then will you finally understand the truth of love, not as sacrifice, but as presence. The time for emotional martyrdom is over. The time for conscious embodiment has come. The fire within you has flickered too long beneath the winds of other people's emotions. And though you have called it compassion, I must tell you with the weight of truth and the tenderness of warning that it has not always been love. Much of it has been fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being unloved unless you are useful, fear of your own aloneness, masquerading as divine sensitivity. This is not condemnation, it is awakening, for no one taught you that your empathy could become a trap. No one told you that the very gift that makes you see so deeply could also blind you to yourself. But now I tell you, not to shame you, but to liberate you. You see, the empath is often an orphan, not always in body, but in soul. Somewhere in the early years, they were made to believe that their emotions were too much, or not enough, or simply irrelevant. And so they turned outward. They learned to attune, to scan, to detect the slightest change in someone else's tone, breath, glance. They became emotional clairvoyants, not because they were magical, but because they were surviving. They became saviors, not because they were saints, but because no one ever came to save them. And what is not mourned becomes repeated. What is not made conscious becomes fate. Thus, you attract what you do not yet understand. You draw to you the broken, the needy, the narcissistic, the volatile. You do not mean to. It is not your fault, but it is your pattern. And unless you see this clearly without romanticizing your role, you will mistake your enmeshments for intimacy and your over-functioning for connection. Now, let us dive deeper into the dreamscape, into the unconscious symbols that you must learn to read if you are ever to reclaim your soul. A dream once came to a woman in my care. In it, she wandered a vast forest at night, barefoot, guided only by the distant cries of others in pain. She followed them tirelessly, one after another. She wrapped their wounds, held their heads as they wept. built them fires. But each time she tried to return to the path, she realized she had forgotten where it began. The cries never stopped. Her feet blew, the trees thickened, and in the final image, she stood before a river, wanting to cross, but the bridge had dissolved. I asked her, "Why do you think the bridge was gone?" She answered, "Because I never built it for myself." This is the psychic architecture of the unintegrated empath. You build roads to others, but never to your own becoming. And so you are stranded, needed, but never nourished, loved, but never seen. You are the eternal caretaker, the background light in everyone else's theater. But who cares for you? Who holds your weeping form in the forest? Who wraps your wounds? You think it's selfish to ask such things, but I tell you, it is sacred. The soul cannot bloom in exhaustion. It does not thrive in sacrifice without reciprocity. It does not sing when every note is sung for someone else's healing while your own chords remain unplayed. The soul revolts quietly at first, then louder, then violently. And this rebellion of the self is what many of you now call burnout, anxiety, even spiritual crisis. But it is not a crisis. It is a call, the call to wholeness, to what the ancients called the opus contra naturam, the work against our inherited nature. For what you have inherited is not your true essence. You inherited coping mechanisms, trauma, imprints, adaptive personas. You inherited the masks of emotional labor, the compulsion to fix, the addiction to being needed. But the self, the deeper you, is beneath all that. And it calls to you now. You must answer. To do so, you must walk into the underworld. You must face the shadow. The shadow for the empath is not merely the aggression they repress. It is also the resentment, the entitlement, the rage at never being appreciated, the guilt for finally saying no, the shame for wanting to be seen. It is the desire to take for once instead of give. These are your hidden faces. You pretend they are not there, but they are. And the longer you deny them, the more they leak into your life through passive fury, sudden fatigue, or illness with no name. Let us speak clearly now. You cannot be whole until you integrate the parts you are ashamed of. You cannot be sovereign until you face the truth of your manipulations, even those born from good intentions. Yes, you sometimes help so that you are loved. Yes, you sometimes give so that you are not left. Yes, you sometimes merge with another's suffering so you can avoid your own. This is not evil. It is human, but it must be seen. It must be brought to the light. For the unconscious does not care about your intentions. It only cares about wholeness. And what is wholeness? It is the union of opposites, the embrace of light and dark, the sacred marriage of the giving self and the needing self, of the healer and the hurt child, of the savior and the sovereign. It is the moment when the empath looks into the mirror and finally says, I see you, I will not abandon you anymore. And this, too, is where love begins. Not the love that drains, but the love that sustains, not the love that empties, but the love that expands. It is the moment when you stop needing to rescue others because you no longer need them to rescue you through the identity of being the rescuer. You begin to see others clearly, not as projects, not as wounded birds, but as sovereign souls on their own journeys. You can walk with them, witness them, even weep with them, but you no longer bleed for them. You no longer confuse entanglement with intimacy. You no longer call it love when it is really fusion. You no longer disappear in order to feel connection. The path of individuation is not a rejection of empathy. It is its refinement. It is empathy with awareness, empathy with edges, empathy with the wisdom to ask, is this mine to carry? And if the answer is no, you do not carry it. Not because you are unkind, but because you are finally wise. Let me offer now a symbol, an image from the depths of the collective unconscious. Imagine a great well, at the bottom of it, clear water. This is your essence. But over the years, others have come. They have thrown their fears into it, their grief, their rage, their need, and you have let them. You thought it was noble. You thought you were helping. But now the water is murky and you are thirsty. You bend to drink, but the water poisons you, not fatally, not violently, but slowly, subtly. It numbs your tongue, clouds your eyes, dulls your knowing. You begin to forget your dreams, your joy, your wildness, your voice. And so, I ask you now, will you cleanse the well? Will you draw up each bucket, one by one, and pour it out? Will you name each emotion, each weight, and say, this is not mine? Will you let your tears purify the depths? Will you finally drink from your own source? This is the final warning. Not because you are about to perish, but because the soul can no longer tolerate delay. The time of unconscious empathy is over. The age of the leaking spirit is done. You are not here to dissolve into others. You are here to become whole in yourself, and from that wholeness, your love will be clean. Your energy will be sharp. Your presence will be sacred, not because you give everything, but because you give from something, and that something, at last, will be you. You have spent lifetimes learning how to tune in to others, but now your work is to tune inward, not with the aim of self-obsession, but with the goal of reintegration, because something ancient has fractured in you, an axis misaligned, a center dislocated. It was not your fault, but it is your responsibility now, not to become more for others, but to return fully to yourself. The journey back begins in the silence, real silence, not the absence of noise, but the absence of distraction. When you finally sit alone, not reaching, not scanning, not holding space for anyone but the orphaned pieces within. And in that silence, you may encounter strange things, restlessness, fear, a trembling sense of dislocation. This is withdrawal, this is detox. This is the soul, relearning how to be sovereign. Many who walk the empath path are terrified of this silence. It feels empty. It feels like abandonment, but that is only the echo of childhood. That is only the nervous system remembering what it felt like to be alone with feelings too big to hold. And so your psyche built a strategy, attach attune, absorb that strategy saved you, then it will break you now. Because what once protected you has become your prison. To evolve is to say thank you to the strategy and to let it go. You are not the child anymore. You are the adult. You have tools now. You have choice. You have the capacity to sit with discomfort without vanishing into someone else's emergency. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to embody. And embodiment means full presence in your own body, your own field, your own truth. That is the only place from which genuine empathy can emerge. Let us speak again of archetypes, for you are not just personal stories. You are the living theater of the collective unconscious, playing out dramas much older than your name. The wounded healer is one such archetype, born from the myth of Chiron, the centaur, who could heal all but himself. Many empaths live from this place. They heal others because they cannot bear to face their own woundedness. They shine light outward because their own caves are too frightening. They feel everything for everyone. Because to feel their own pain is to remember the original rupture, the primal abandonment, the emotional neglect, the betrayal of being unseen. But the path of the wounded healer is not to stay wounded. That is only the beginning. The true initiation comes when you turn the salve inward, when you stop offering your medicine to those who demand it and begin offering it to the parts of you that have waited decades to be acknowledged. There is no shortcut here, no affirmation or mantra that can bypass this sacred descent. You must go into the wound. You must sit with your unmet grief. You must mourn the years you gave away your essence in the name of being good, kind, spiritual. These were lies, necessary lies, perhaps, but lies nonetheless. And the psyche cannot integrate lies. Only truth heals. And the truth is much of what you called love was survival. Much of what you called sensitivity was hypervigilance. Much of what you called connection was enmeshment. These are not condemnations. They are clarifications. And with them comes power, the power to choose differently. The power to step out of the myth you inherited and into the story you now claim. Let me tell you about another dream. A man stands at the edge of a cliff, watching a great sea churn below. On his back are dozens of ropes, each tied to a different person. Some ropes are frayed, some taut, some dragging him backward. He does not move. He believes to step forward is to betray them all. But slowly, a voice rises from within the wind, from within his own ribs. You were not born to carry, you were born to create. He weeps. He cuts a single rope, then another and another. He does not fall, he flies. You must understand, this letting go is not abandonment. It is alignment. When you stop carrying others, you allow them to find their own strength. You stop interfering in the karmic paths of others. You stop making yourself God. And in doing so, you finally allow yourself to be human. There is a deep narcissism in unconscious empathy, a belief that your love can save, fix, redeem. But redemption is not your job. That belongs to the self, the inner God image. In each of us, you may walk beside someone, you may witness them, but to merge is to interfere. To absorb is to trespass. And the soul, though quiet, will not tolerate trespass forever. Your exhaustion is not noble. It is the voice of your deeper self pleading for boundaries. And boundaries, when held with clarity, do not harm others. They liberate them. They clarify what is yours and what is not. They teach responsibility. They return energy to its rightful place. A clear boundary is an act of love because it says, I will not betray myself to be close to you. And that is the only love worth offering. Many of you have mistaken being used for being needed. You have allowed yourself to become the emotional landfill of others, believing this made you worthy. But what it really made you was fragmented. You lost your signal in the static of everyone else's emotions. And now you wonder why you feel numb, anxious, even dead inside. But you are not dead. You are displaced. And your return begins here with this realization. You do not owe anyone your erosion. Let that sink into your bones, into the marrow of your beliefs. You do not owe anyone your erosion. Not your parents, not your partner, not your community, not even the wounded child you once were. You owe only this to become whole. And wholeness, while it includes others, does not sacrifice itself for them. There is a sacred geometry to the psyche, a balance that must be honored. And when you honor yourself, truly others rise to meet you in that clarity, or they fall away. Let them, those who need you to be small, exhausted, and boundaryless, to stay connected, were never in love with you. They were in love with your absence. They were in love with the space you gave them to avoid themselves. That is not love, it is codependence. The time for that is over. You may grieve, you may tremble, but do not return to the old myth. It will consume you. Your nervous system will beg for the familiar. Your shadow will whisper, just one more person to help, then you'll feel better. But do not listen. That voice is not your truth. It is your pattern, and patterns, once seen, lose their power. I leave you in this moment with a final image. A temple, ancient and crumbling, once filled with idols of self-sacrifice and silence, now empty, quiet, but in the center a single candle flickers, and beside it a throne covered in dust, but waiting for you to remember, waiting for you to return, not as the helper, not as the healer, but as the sovereign. Sit upon that throne, not to rule others, but to no longer abandon yourself